While Morris and Captain Murdoch argued in the back, Larry and Emily waited with a handful of other officers looking on. Lieutenant Dunn tried to mediate. "Dunn, we're reviewing the report. Please be patient. Emily, can you officially state the reason? Why keep a Navy lieutenant commander in custody just for asking why she was pulled over?" Dunn hesitating, Officer Morris claims she was uncooperative. Larry, uncooperative, or simply asking legitimate questions? Remember, the law allows drivers to ask why they're being stopped. Tension spiked, drawing the attention of nearby officers. Before anyone could respond further, the door to the captain's office flung open. Captain Francis Murdoch emerged, looking severe, followed by Morris. Murdoch in a clear voice, "I've decided to temporarily release Ms. Avery Jordan while we continue our investigation. We reserve the right to call her back if necessary." Emily swiftly turned her camera on to capture the moment. Larry nodded, relieved but keeping a polite demeanor. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be taking my client home. If you have further questions, direct them to her attorney." Standing behind Murdoch, Morris clenched his fists, his eyes filled with resentment. He felt his once solid authority slip through his fingers, never having faced so much scrutiny from the press before. The cell door opened. Avery stepped out with her personal belongings in hand. She glanced at Morris and brushed past him as though he were invisible. Inside, she was still fuming. But outwardly, she remained composed. Larry guided her into the lobby, and Emily recorded a brief interview. "Emily, Avery, how do you feel about spending the night in custody?" Avery voice calm, "I'll let my lawyer address the specifics, but I believe in justice. The truth will come out." She managed her agitation, and they left the station immediately. Morris stood behind, jaw tight, face flushing. A few co-workers eyed him knowingly. Back at her home, Avery showered and changed clothes. Exhaustion tugged at her, yet she had to stay sharp. She received a call from her Navy superior, Captain Rebecca Harrington, who oversaw domestic security matters. "Captain Harrington, Jordan, are you all right? We've heard what happened. We'll provide legal support if needed." Avery, "Thank you, ma'am. I'm fine. The police might still press charges, so this could go to court." Harrington, "Don't worry. Remain calm. We'll do everything we can to protect you." Once she ended the call, Avery reflected, "Not everyone has the kind of backing I do. How many have been cornered without resources?" Meanwhile, Larry phoned to update her. The district attorney had taken up the case and was investigating Morris for suspected racial bias and abuse of authority. Captain Murdoch, sensing the heat, tried to reach out to negotiate and avoid more bad press. Larry sighing, they might offer a settlement and an apology or Morris's resignation to kill the story. "But I think we should see this through in court." Avery, "Yes. I want full transparency." 3 weeks after the arrest, Westmore County Court held a preliminary hearing. That day, the sky was clear and blue, but tension crackled in the air. Protesters and media crowded the courthouse entrance, holding signs reading "End Police Violence" and "Justice for Everyone." Avery arrived with Larry, looking poised in a navy blue suit. She exuded confidence. Opposite her, Morris appeared in full uniform, his badge neatly pinned, his face stony. He arrived with his attorney, who seemed ill at ease in front of the swarm of reporters. In the courtroom, Judge Helen Reinhardt, a seasoned judge of over 20 years, called the hearing to order. District Attorney Bruce Allen addressed the court. "Your Honor, we allege that Officer Cornell Morris unlawfully detained and abused his authority against Lieutenant Commander Avery Jordan. The charges are based on evidence from witness testimonies and footage from Morris's body camera." A hush fell over the room. They played the body cam video again, this time openly. The footage was crystal clear, Morris demanding Avery exit the vehicle without stating a reason. Speaking to her with a tone of disdain. Everyone could hear his threatening voice. Morris's complexion shifted from pale to red. D.A. Allen, as you can see, the plaintiff did not resist. Morris twisted her arm and cuffed her immediately after she calmly asked why she had been stopped. The defense lawyer, Earl Hopkins, tried to argue. My client may have been under stress. He routinely confronts dangerous criminals. It was late, the roads were deserted, and Ms. Jordan's intentions were unknown. But Allen countered with Avery's exemplary naval record and the official reason for her trip, making it clear there was zero basis for suspicion. Judge Reinhardt asked Morris directly. Officer, do you have any explanation? Morris rose, swallowing nervously. I followed protocol. She refused to cooperate. It was late at night, and I had to ensure safety. His voice quivered, revealing a lack of confidence. At the close of the hearing, Judge Reinhardt announced a recess to review the evidence further. But it looked grim for Morris. News of the hearing spread. The Oakford Police Department came under intense pressure from the City Council. Captain Murdoch summoned Morris to his office. The air thick with crisis. Murdoch, you've caused a major problem. Lieutenant Commander Jordan isn't just anyone. Is there actual evidence to justify her arrest? What about your body camera footage? Morris uneasy, she wasn't complying. I'll file my report. Murdoch pointed an accusing finger. File it now. And if there's nothing proving she resisted, we'll have to release her fully. Morris's jaw clenched. He knew the footage would reveal he never gave Avery a chance to respond, that he made immediate threats. Worse, it showed him making remarks that could be seen as intimidation. While Murdoch and Morris argued behind closed doors, Larry, Emily, and a few officers lingered in the hallway. Lieutenant Dunn appeared to smooth things over. Dunn, we're examining the report. Please bear with us. Emily, are you ready to provide a formal statement now? Why is she being detained merely for questioning a traffic stop? Dunn stammering, according to Morris. She was non-compliant. Larry, non-compliant or simply asking questions within her rights? Remember, the law allows citizens to know why they're being stopped. The tension deepened. A few more officers gathered, some sympathetic, some shaking their heads. The captain's office door swung open again. Murdoch exited, face grim, with Morris trailing behind, fists balled and shoulders rigid. Murdoch firmly, I'm placing Officer Morris on immediate suspension pending an internal affairs investigation. This department can't take more hits. Morris was livid, but there was little he could do. He stripped off his name badge, hurling it aside, and stormed out. Officers in the corridor watched him pass by with wary gazes. Ever since he'd joined the force, he had never felt so isolated. Meanwhile, Avery took a moment to gather her thoughts after being released. She met with a few military friends to review her case documents. She also attended a gathering of local veterans. Many of them people of color. One young woman, Naomi Brooks, had recently left the service and tearfully recalled being harassed by local police on her way to a job interview. I panicked, Naomi said through her tears, I just complied and got ticketed for something I didn't do. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I had to pay the fine. Avery gently squeezed Naomi's hand. That's why we have to speak up. So many people with less support get trapped. This meeting only fueled Avery's resolve. I can't let this blow over quietly. If I win, it sets a precedent for others to stand up for themselves. 3 months after the initial arrest, the main trial began. Hundreds of supporters showed up for Avery. Among them were veterans, social activists, everyday citizens who had faced injustice. and a swarm of reporters. The courtroom was packed. Judge Reinhardt presided, gavel in hand, signaling the start. Today we convene to hear charges of abuse of authority and unlawful detainment by defendant Cornell Morris against plaintiff Avery Jordan. District Attorney Allen systematically laid out the prosecution's case, calling witnesses one by one. First was Avery, then Officer Roy Campbell, the desk officer who had secretly called Larry. Campbell confirmed that Morris never let Avery explain, that he cuffed her too tightly and didn't file proper paperwork. They replayed Morris's body camera footage, supplemented by expert analysis showing how Morris's tone was coercive, while Avery was compliant until she was cuffed. The defense attorney, Hopkins, struggled to maintain a coherent argument. Officer Morris was on edge from dealing with dangerous criminals. It was a late-night stop, and Ms. Jordan's motives were unclear. But Allen once again underscored Avery's impeccable service record. There was no logical basis to suspect her at all. Finally, an internal investigator from the Oakford Police, Sergeant Nick Briggs, a new supporting character, took the stand. "I've received multiple complaints about Officer Morris's behavior toward people of color, especially women. I reported them, but nothing was resolved at the higher levels." The jury buzzed. Morris glowered, aware that his case was crumbling. After over 4 hours of testimony, Judge Reinhardt offered her conclusion. "It is clear from the evidence that Lieutenant Commander Avery Jordan did nothing to warrant arrest. Officer Cornell Morris misused his power, violating Ms. Jordan's civil rights. The matter will proceed to the disciplinary board and potentially to criminal prosecution." The courtroom erupted. Many in the audience applauded. Morris stood frozen, face ashen, gripping the back of his chair. He likely realized his career was finished. The following day, Oakford PD publicly announced that Morris was terminated from the force, promising to revamp its internal review procedures. Captain Murdoch also faced official censure and a pay cut for failing to address the complaints. The community felt triumphant. But Avery remained contemplative. One bad apple is gone, but does that fix the barrel? Media coverage exploded. Emily Hayes interviewed Avery at the TV station. "Emily, Avery. Any message you'd like to share with the public?" Avery softly, "I hope this highlights that we need to stay alert to abuse of power. If you're ever treated unjustly, don't remain silent. We need collective effort to make real changes." Off camera, Larry smiled with satisfaction. He had fought alongside Avery in this legal battle, and they'd won, at least for now. A week later, at a small community center in Oakford, Avery was invited to speak at an event titled Justice and Community. The room was modest but welcoming, decorated with photos of charitable endeavors. Attending were individuals who had experienced police overreach. Among them was Naomi Brooks, who Avery had met earlier. Standing at a simple podium, Avery addressed the crowd in a clear, measured voice. "We all have different personal stories, but we share a common desire for justice. What happened to me shows that with evidence, determination, and unity, we can prevail. But more importantly, we need to demand institutional reforms so no one else suffers a similar fate." In the audience, an elderly African American man listened with tears brimming, whispering, "Finally, our children have a better chance. Thank you." Avery let her gaze sweep across the crowd, men, women, veterans, everyday families, and saw hope. She realized that her victory wasn't just for herself. It was for all who believe justice must be upheld. She stepped down amid thunderous applause. Naomi came forward to shake her hand, eyes shining. "Thank you. I've decided to enroll in law school so I can help people like me." Avery smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. As for Morris, he packed up his belongings and quietly left the station. His future looked grim. He attempted a countersuit, claiming political persecution. But no one supported him. Former allies distanced themselves. He had once believed his badge granted him invincibility, but in the end, his misused authority turned against him like a double-edged sword. Oakford's mayor, Beatrice Moring, held a public press conference, apologizing to Avery and pledging a departmental overhaul. She announced the creation of an independent oversight board, bringing in representatives from the military and human rights groups. She praised Avery for her courage and steadfastness. One afternoon, as Avery was preparing to return to her naval base, a young messenger delivered a handwritten letter. The envelope contained only a few shaky lines. "Jordan, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Not just for your arrest, but for everything else I've done wrong in the past, to others. I was taught to despise people like you, but I realize I was wrong. I've lost my job. Lost a lot, but maybe I'm finally learning how to be human. Cornell D. Morris." Avery folded the note, exhaling slowly. She couldn't be sure if his remorse was genuine or simply desperation. Either way, she chose a calm acceptance. Instead of holding on to hatred, she found relief in the possibility that people can still reflect and change. It was late at night on a dreary October day. A fine drizzle had been falling for hours, making the air damp and chilly. Along Highway 215 on the outskirts of Oakford, Westmore, there were barely any signs of life. Occasionally, a car would speed by, its headlights slicing through the darkness before disappearing again. It was the time of night when even the last open diners were preparing to close. And most sensible people just wanted to be home. On that deserted stretch of road, Avery Jordan, a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, was driving her gray SUV through the light rain. She was an African-American woman in her early 30s, tall and fit. She wore a simple black turtleneck sweater and jeans, exuding an understated style. Yet her gaze reflected unwavering determination and a certain authority. She had just left a regional security meeting in a neighboring city, driving over 2 hours to return home. Over the radio, the classic jazz tune "Autumn Leaves" played softly, stirring memories of her early days at the Naval Academy. The slippery roads demanded her full attention, yet Avery's mind occasionally drifted back to the meeting she had attended. The main topic was strengthening cooperation between the military and local law enforcement. She wasn't fond of politics, but she understood that to change things at the core, sometimes you have to enter complex administrative territory. That explained why she was on the road so late, leaving after most of the other delegates had gone. Suddenly, in her rearview mirror, she noticed the unmistakable flashing of red and blue lights, a patrol car. Weariness and a faint sense of apprehension gripped her. Being stopped by the police late at night, in the rain, on a deserted stretch of road, can make anyone's heart skip a beat, especially if you're a person of color. Having served in the military, Avery was well versed in proper protocol during a traffic stop. She sighed, turned on her blinker, and carefully pulled over. She switched off the radio, rested both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. The patrol car pulled up behind her. Through her mirror, she saw a burly officer step out, dressed in a dark windbreaker, flashlight in hand, walking deliberately, as though he had complete control of the situation. She noted the gleaming police badge on his chest and the name embroidered on it, Cornell D. Morris. License and registration. His tone was curt, lacking any greeting or explanation. Avery kept both hands on the wheel so he could see them. "I'll retrieve them from the glove compartment, if that's all right," she said politely. Morris gave a slight nod and spoke in a gruff voice. "You were speeding." She was a bit surprised. She'd been carefully driving under the speed limit given the wet roads. Nonetheless, Avery handed Morris her documents, then calmly responded. "I've been driving around 50 miles an hour. It's slippery out here, I can't go any faster. Morris took the papers, glanced at them, and shone his flashlight in her face. Are you arguing with an officer? Outside, the rain continued to patter on the car's hood. For a moment, Avery felt a tension in the air like a taut string about to snap. It was late, isolated, with no other witnesses around. But she had no better option than to comply, at least for now. I'm not arguing, just explaining, she said calmly. Morris abruptly waved her out of the car. Step out. Right now. Avery's face tensed. She looked ahead at the dark, rain-soaked road, where there wasn't a soul in sight. A pang of unease rippled through her, but she complied. She got out. Feeling the cold wind whip across her shoulders, her neatly bound hair dampening from the drizzle. Could you at least tell me why? She asked, cautious yet composed. Morris gave a half-smile that felt more like a sneer. Because I told you to. In that moment, Avery weighed her options. This man seemed to enjoy absolute obedience. She'd encountered stern superiors in the Navy, but this was a different setting. She didn't want things to escalate. All right, she murmured, closing the car door behind her. Morris pretended to inspect the tires, the brake lights. He swept his flashlight from underneath the car up to the windows. The rain was still drizzling on his jacket. Then he turned to face her. Turn around. Hands on the hood. Avery hesitated. On what grounds? Morris lost whatever patience he had. He snapped. Didn't you hear? Or do you want cuffs right now? A swirl of anger rose in Avery. She had confronted danger on high-risk missions, abiding by strict protocols on naval bases. But here, she was faced with an officer apparently abusing his power. Rather than resist, she took a deep breath, reminding herself, don't create more trouble. I'll deal with this later. She slowly turned around and placed her hands on the cold metal hood, feeling raindrops slip through her fingers. Without warning, Morris grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. And cuffed her. The chilly, rigid metal pressing into her skin made her shiver. He pulled her roughly toward the back seat of his patrol car. You're under arrest for obstructing a peace officer, he declared flatly. Avery forced herself to stay calm. I won't be another statistic. She had heard far too many similar stories, people of color, women, or minorities detained on flimsy grounds. The patrol car door slammed shut. Outside, Morris moved with the smug satisfaction of someone who'd gotten his way. He muttered into his radio, though she couldn't hear exactly what he was saying. Then he climbed into the driver's seat, started the car, and whistled. Glancing through the rearview mirror, she could see his half-smirk, the kind so many had feared. The patrol car turned into the main gate of the Oakford police station. A gray brick structure on the eastern side of the city. The clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. The parking lot was almost empty, with just a few other vehicles scattered around. Avery was led inside the reception area. A square room with a harsh metal counter, illuminated by a flickering neon light that made it feel colder. A young desk officer, Roy Campbell. Around 25, with a tired yet gentle expression, looked up at Avery curiously, then returned his focus to the computer screen as if he didn't want to get involved. Morris kept silent while processing her intake. He briefly removed the cuffs for fingerprinting and photographing, then immediately snapped them back on, as though afraid she might escape. He motioned to Campbell to do nothing more. Avery noticed a sign behind the counter that read, Oakford Police Department, Serve Protect. It struck her as ironic. To the holding cell, Morris commanded with a jerk of his head. Avery walked down a narrow corridor with dingy brick walls, the pungent smell of disinfectant mingling with musty air. At the end of the hallway was a row of cells with cold metal bars. Morris unlocked one empty cell and shoved her in before slamming the door. She was left with a single metal bunk bolted to the wall, a steel sink, and an exposed toilet. A weak, flickering overhead bulb added to the gloom. Avery sat on the bunk, noticing how the handcuffs had left red welts on her wrists. Outside, she could hear Morris's footsteps receding, then disappearing into silence. Rain still pattered on the tin roof. No one was around to watch, no one to post bail at this hour. Avery closed her eyes, recalling the rigorous Naval Academy training: maintain steady breathing. Stay calm. Don't panic. She also remembered her father's words, a Gulf War veteran: sometimes you'll face a badge without the soul of a protector. You need to know how to save yourself. She did have some advantages. She was a lieutenant commander, with superiors and colleagues who would back her up, plus a military lawyer if needed. And perhaps there was evidence on the officer's body camera. Assuming it hadn't been switched off. Even so, she couldn't help recalling stories about racial bias. Am I truly safe? The cell was cold and smelled of stale air and leftover food. She decided to quell her anger and try to sleep a bit. Meanwhile, across town, Lawrence Larry Williamson, Avery's close friend and legal partner, was about to switch off the lights in his office. He was a former prosecutor turned civilian and military legal advisor. He knew Avery had been driving back from the meeting, but it never crossed his mind she could be in trouble. Then his office phone rang loudly. Law Office of Larry Williamson. Mr. Williamson? This is Officer Roy Campbell from the Oakford Police Desk. I can't talk long. A woman named Avery Jordan was just taken into custody. I found your number in her wallet. Avery Jordan? Larry straightened up, fully alert. What happened? She's charged with obstructing a peace officer. But I think something's off. The voice murmured anxiously. Worry etched onto Larry's face. He pressed Campbell for details. The young officer couldn't say much for fear of being overheard. Larry thanked him, hung up, and immediately called Emily Hayes, a television reporter in the city who had collaborated with Avery on a community project. Emily, I need your help. Avery Jordan's been arrested under suspicious circumstances. I suspect an abuse of power. Avery? That can't be right. She's not the type to cause trouble. I'll handle it, Larry. Text me the station address. After the call, Larry grabbed his keys and coat, rushing out of the office. He knew Avery was tough, but any situation could spiral when dealing with a rogue cop. I have to get there right now. Avery woke to the metallic rattle of the cell door. Officer Martha Lopez, a woman in her 50s, stood there holding a meager breakfast, a piece of dry bread and a cold cup of coffee. You okay? Lopez asked, her tone neither cold nor particularly kind. I'm fine, Avery replied. Lopez studied her discreetly, rumpled clothes, dark circles under her eyes, but a steady posture that suggested hidden strength. After years on the force, Lopez could sense that Avery didn't fit the usual profile of a troublemaker. But orders were orders. She set the tray on a bench, then locked the cell door again. Soon after, Morris arrived, waving a set of documents at Avery. Spill everything. Name, age, occupation, your reason for leaving town, your exact travel plans. He smirked. Of course, you have the right to remain silent. Which means you'll just sit here and wait. Avery rose and stepped toward the bars. You do realize I'm a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. I'm entitled to contact the military legal system. You're obstructing that. Morris's expression flickered for an instant, but he quickly narrowed his eyes. Don't threaten me. You think wearing a uniform puts you above the law? He spun around and left. Avery wondered for a second why he harbored such hostility. Maybe it was racial bias, or simply a power trip. Around 8 a.m., Larry arrived at the Oakford police station, accompanied by Emily Hayes, who carried a small video camera. Upon entering the lobby, they were immediately blocked by a young officer. "I'm the attorney representing Avery Jordan," Larry said firmly, showing his ID. "I demand to see my client." The young officer hesitated. "I need to report this to my superiors. Please have a seat and wait." Emily stepped forward. "Why was she arrested? We have a right to report on this." Tension filled the air. Finally, Lieutenant Michael Dunn, the station's second-in-command, came out to speak. "Hello. I'm Dunn. Regarding Ms. Jordan's case, it's under investigation. We have no further comment." Larry frowned, pressing the issue. "You can't hold her indefinitely. I demand bail or a formal charge." Dunn, flustered, tried to muster a polite smile. "We'll look into it promptly." Standing nearby, Emily quietly filmed the exchange. A few officers passing by glanced over, aware that media presence meant trouble. Dunn then mumbled into his radio, seemingly calling someone else. While Dunn was dealing with the commotion outside, Morris sat alone in the break room, looking tense. The knowledge that a lawyer and a reporter were on the premises made him uneasy. "I didn't realize she had such connections." He recalled his years patrolling the outskirts of Oakford, an area largely populated by people of color and immigrants. He'd learned that most people froze at the sight of a police badge, especially late at night in deserted places. Many had pleaded with him, trembling, fearful. He had relished that sense of control. But this time, that black woman had shown no fear. She had calmly questioned him, citing her rights and her rank. He still struggled to believe that she was an actual naval officer, or more accurately, he refused to accept it. Part of the reason lay in his troubled past. His father had served in the military but had been demoted for disciplinary violations, disgracing the family. Since then, Morris had carried a lingering resentment toward successful service members, believing they were arrogant and looked down on others. He hated remembering his impoverished childhood in a run-down neighborhood, his father's drunken tirades. He hated being compared to the other kids who served with honor. And so, after failing to get into a military academy, he joined the police force to prove himself. "I have a badge. 2. I have authority." This time, though, he sensed real trouble. "I won't let it end everything for me." Rising abruptly, he headed to the captain's office.